don't block the path of inquiry. Don't lay down rules that make it impossible for people to ask important questions.
Welcome to the Thought Stretchers podcast, where we hope to stretch your thinking about important issues in education through rich inquiry. My name is Drew Perkins, and I'm your host for these conversations for complexity and nuance. Hello, and thanks for tuning in again. I really do appreciate it. A few notes this week for housekeeping. One is that we have a really great reading, instruction, evidence, and neuroscience event coming up as part of our Thought Stretchers education community. That's Wednesday night, March 27th. It will feature Dr. Karen Gazeth, who has a new book which is titled The Power of Effective Reading Instruction, How Neuroscience Informs Instruction Across All Grades and Disciplines. Joining us also will be Christy Biggerstaff, the Director of Early Literacy for Kentucky's Department of Education, as well as Sonia Thomas, who is the CEO of a parent advocacy group that focuses on instruction and reading instruction called Nashville Propel. So again, that's March 27th in the evening in the Eastern Time. So if you're so inclined and interested in reading instruction and the reading wars, I would encourage you to join us for that. We also have our PBL Grow 24 event here in Louisville, Kentucky, which will be held June 24th through 26th. Early bird registration is available until the end of March, so if you are interested in that and want that early bird price, jump over to wegrowteachers.com/grow24 and you'll see information there and you can register. I'd also like to mention a couple of workshops that we've added recently. One of those is an AI in Education workshop titled Transformative Teaching with Generative AI. This is a 2-day workshop, the first day focusing on AI fundamentals and the second one focusing on deepening AI integration. So if you'd like help with better understanding AI and how to use it to your advantage in education, please check that one out. Another is our Teaching with Objective Pluralism workshop. In case you haven't noticed, some schools have been struggling to navigate some of the culture war issues and figure out how to teach things that might be perceived as uncomfortable. Our Teaching with Objective Pluralism workshop can help you with that because it helps you make some important distinctions and shows you how to bring in a variety of perspectives in ways that are pluralistic while still relying on accepted truths and things that are supported by evidence. I did write a blog piece that might be helpful titled Want to Teach the Truth? Use Objective Pluralism. And of course, you can visit our top menu on our website, wegrowteachers.com, and find the Objective Pluralism Workshop in that drop-down menu there. As always, you can reach out to me if you have any questions, concerns, ideas, or thoughts you'd like to express at drew@thoughtstretchers.org. In this episode, I spoke with Ilker Çatak, who is the director and co-writer of a film called The Teacher's Lounge. It's not often that I speak with movie and film directors, but this one is obviously related to education, hence the name The Teacher's Lounge. It's about a new teacher and the ways in which she is trying to navigate some tricky situations with regards to power relations and truth and justice and racism and respect. And we talked about those things and more. The film has been nominated for a Best International Feature Oscar. The film is in German, but it does have subtitles, and I would hope that wouldn't discourage you from viewing it. You should be able to find it in art house movie theaters around the United States, and depending on when you're listening to this, it should be on one of the main streaming services at some point. Again, it's not often I speak with film directors, but this one is worth a watch and certainly gets into some of the topics and concepts that we talk about here on the podcast frequently. All right, I'm here with Ilker, and Ilker is going to introduce himself and pronounce his name much better than I can, I'm sure. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about the movie that he, I think, wrote and directed called The Teacher's Lounge, and I was able to view it, and certainly an interesting film. But I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and give our listeners any background information about yourself that you think they might find relevant.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you for this introduction. My name is Ilker Çatak. I am the co-writer and director of The Teacher's Lounge, a film I made 2 years ago and it opened in the US recently. It's in theaters right now. It's been nominated for an Oscar, which was pretty amazing to all of us, to my whole crew and team, and the kids that are playing, in the film. And it's about a teacher who tries to get to the bottom of some thefts that are going on in her school, and while doing so, she finds herself in the eye of the storm. I think it's appropriate to say that without giving too much away.
Right. And I'm gonna probably ask some questions, and you tell me if I'm giving too much away as I'm going through here. But certainly an interesting film. But I guess start us off, if you would, by telling folks, why is it that you thought it was important to make this, and maybe even in a context of what was your educational experience growing up?
So I grew up in Germany and in Turkey. So I went to school in Germany until I was 12, and then we moved to Turkey, and I went to a German-Turkish school in Istanbul. And I have to say I was lucky enough to have really good teachers, and I was lucky enough to be a good student. Even though there were times where I was a bit of a troublemaker, but we wrote this film. I wrote this film together with my school friend from school, Johannes Dunker, and it's just such a nice thing to write a film about school with the person you went to school with, because you can say, maybe that teacher should be like XY, maybe so. And it was a very easy communication, because we could just refer to people that we both know. And we decided to make a film about school, and a film that takes in school, because school has always been fascinating to me. It's an incredibly rich playground to tell a story. You have different generations, you have different people, you have all these parties, and when you look at it closely, every school is set up like a country. You have like the dean, you have people in charge. You have the student body, which would be the people. You have a school paper, which could represent journalism. And we took it like that. We thought, this school is our world that we live in, and let's make a film not just about school, but also about the bigger picture.
Okay, so you said, I'm going to pull on the thread a little bit. You mentioned the school where you attended as a kid. You said it was, I think you said good, or it was a good school, something like that. I'm curious how you would define good, because the film doesn't get into pedagogy, but I'm always curious to hear educational experiences and how people define what was a good education.
Well, I would say the film gets into pedagogy, because it shows a teacher who's trying to do good, and we thought that by creating this character, we were actually thinking about the question, what is a good teacher? And when you really think about it and try to answer it, I think everybody has to answer this on their own. But to me, a good teacher is one that sees beyond the stuff that they have to deliver. That the ones that see their students individually and can go on and say, I saw you have this talent, let's talk about that, or you have this interest, let's talk about that. For instance, I'm going to give you an example of a good teacher. My co-writer Johannes, as I said, we went to school together, and we were talking about films in one of our breaks, and one of our teachers came to us and said, I hear you're talking about films. And we said yes. And he said, do you know a guy called Stanley Kubrick? And we said, no. He said, well, let me give you this film. And 2 days later, he brought 2001. So we went home, watched the film, And we were like, well, we didn't really get it. And then he started talking to us about it. And this conversation to both of us kind of sparked our love for cinema, I think. And then, you started looking and watching films in a different way. So a good teacher is not just, it sees you as a person or hears you, and then goes, tries to encourage you to go down that road. To me, at least.
Talking about good teachers and what teachers bring to the table and bring out of students, you obviously become a writer and director. And some of the things that we talk about quite often here is how do we prepare students for the modern world? And I'm curious how you might think about that, right? So what are the things that you would say are essential and, or I guess maybe for you especially, have helped you and sort of prepared you for the life that you, in the work that you do now?
I think a good teacher will have to teach how to think critically and not take things for granted. And this is something that, I think is nowadays the most important thing that you can teach a student, to really make up their own minds and not take things for granted. Because we live in a world that is so chaotic, where there is so much information and so much noise, that it's very hard to really dig and find the truth in things. And I think there is like this sort of longing for simple answers to very complex circumstances. And this is a threat to, to everything. I think that a good teacher will have to, it's not about memorizing things anymore. We all have phones, and it's really about how to think, and rather than what to think, and to how to make your own conclusions and to make up your own mind without getting influenced by some ideology, or even if you just be aware of what am I exposing myself to, and how can I is this true, or should I question this? I think this is something that needs to be taught to children these days.
Well, we certainly agree in large part, although there's a real push and pull in education between folks who really still emphasize, and I sympathize and empathize with this sentiment, and certainly think it's somewhat important to have some knowledge, right? We don't advocate for people not having any knowledge or knowing anything, just in favor of being able to think, but of course you have to have some knowledge to think with, those kinds of things. So you've mentioned truth a few times here, and truth and knowledge are, there's certainly some crossover there. And one of the themes of the film is the idea of how do we figure out what is true. And again, not to give too much away here, but that sort of runs through the film. And the film is set in Germany, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so the school is in Germany, which, interestingly enough, I think has some laws around surveillance that play into it, and that makes it more difficult to figure out what's true. But, I guess if you can talk a little bit more about that theme of truth and why you thought that was so important here in bringing that out, and the character, help me if I'm mispronouncing her name, is it Leonie Benesch?
Leonie Benesch, yes.
Benesch, yeah. So she's the teacher. She's a fairly new teacher, and she's trying to figure out what is true. So, yeah, I guess if you can unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, so you see, truth has become a very elusive thing, I think. We've been introduced to this notion of alternative facts. Then you saw some very hardening opinions during the pandemic, where people were referring to very different sources on the internet. Should I get vaccinated? Should I not get vaccinated? And there was a chaos of what is truth here? What is the right way to do things? And now we live in the age of AI, which makes it even harder to pinpoint truth. So you might get a phone call with the voice of your mom, and you're not even sure, is that my mom? These things will happen, and it's something that I think bugged us while we wrote this script, and something that's also, we thought, mirroring itself in the way our media has shifted. It's this complex world that I've already been talking about. That is, people need headlines, and journalism needs headlines that create clickbaits. So what happens is complex stories are just being reduced to one headline, and this is a problem. This is something that does not, it does not serve the idea of truth, and it simplifies the world in a way that's comfortable for people, but in this comfort, oftentimes it's not the right way to go, I think, because our world is more complex. It's more complex than it's ever been before, and and that's why we chose to create this kind of chaos in this world, in this school, in this film, where all parties collide, where because when you go on Twitter, right, which is now called X, but anyways, you just read those comments, and it's war. Like, our debate culture has shifted as well. So people are not really discussing things anymore, or trying to listen to each other. It's about being right, and it's about being who's the loudest. You have this whole notion of cancel culture, where you can just be canceled due to an accusation. It doesn't even have to be proven. Mm-hmm. So this, the film starts with a scene where she's a math teacher, where she's talking about the concept of proof, and as a teacher and in theory. And then you see how this concept of proof is actually really hard for her in her own life to execute.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things, or I guess a tension that the film gets into, and you're talking about sort of the different parties, and we talk a lot about objective pluralism in our work with schools, the idea that we want to have viewpoint diversity and be curious about others' opinions and sort of break through that fog of the dynamics that you're mentioning, right? The cancel culture and not being able to say this, or even if you didn't say it, you might be accused of it, and there's effects there. But one of the tensions that I think is very real in our world is a tension between sort of social justice and that kind of mindset. And you get into some of that in the film here, and a tension with truth, because one of the things that it makes it harder to find out what's true when you're not able to say certain things and not able to talk about certain things. So it was that, I mean, as you think about that tension, I'm curious your reaction and how you think about that, especially, I mean, we're here in the United States, we have audience and we do work outside of the United States, certainly, but we I think have a monomaniacal sort of vision and view of the world from the American lens, and I'm curious how you see those things.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to be an educator in Europe as well as in the US. I taught for a semester at the UGA, University of Georgia. And, I got a little into the US academia, which was quite interesting, I must say. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is this thing called a safe space, mm-hmm. which a lot of students want to have, and they're rightfully do so. But I think that safe space that we as educators try to provide to them has made educators' lives not so safe. It's how do you? I'm sorry, by the way, I'm really sorry for my rusty English. I just the thing is, you can, as you say, you can get accused for something you did or not even did, and it's very hard to prove people wrong, right? So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but my feeling is that in the US, that is even a bit, that issue have a little. It's a bigger thing issue than it is here, because the US also is a society that is that has, their conflicts are stronger, and the poles are just much more apart, and I don't know if this is answering your question though.
Yeah, well, the experience that you're detailing in the States, I think you said University of Georgia, and I'd be curious to hear what you did teach. But at the university level, of course, at least most universities are sort of tasked with generating knowledge and finding additional, building on truth and that kind of thing. K-12 is different, right? That's not our task and our role. But at the university, that is a tension that is very real. At least here in the States, we want to figure out what's true and generate additional knowledge and build on the knowledge that we have. And when we aren't able to say certain things or to talk about certain things, it makes it much more difficult to get to that truth or those truths and build upon that knowledge. One thing that maybe is an interesting wrinkle to hear your perspective, of course, being in Germany, there are certain things that you are unable to or are not legally able to talk about or use or say that have to do with sort of Nazi, symbols and that kind of thing. Right. And one can understand why, but there's also sometimes some wrinkles. I was hearing about I can't remember if he was a professor or what he was, but I think he had written a book that was that used the Nazi swastika as on the front cover, and it was about COVID masks or something like that, and it was actually trying to point out some analogies between some things and the problems of Nazi Germany, not to be sympathetic to it, but he has been really sort of punished. So I think that's a really interesting example of where it can go wrong, and I'm curious how that plays out as you live in Germany and this film was in Germany.
Well, you don't even have to go that drastic. I was teaching a film class here in Germany, in Berlin, and I showed the students a scene where a dog gets shot. And there is no gore. You don't see any blood or anything. It's just it's happening off screen. But after that scene, I stopped the scene, and then one of the students got up and said, "Where was the trigger warning? I'm out of here." And all of a sudden she left the room, like slamming the door, and then 3 other students went after her to get her back. And all of a sudden there was a discussion that didn't circle around the thing that you're trying to tell or pass on to these students, but it became a discussion about what is a trigger warning, why do you need it, why should I have said so. And then I said, guys, it's life is life is a trigger warning. What are you like? You want to become filmmakers, and it's I don't know, if we're trying to comfort everyone as educators and we're trying to make things right, but I think that I don't know if that's the right way. I mean, yes, I'm happy when everybody is comfortable and feeling good and is feeling safe. But we also have to teach these students that life isn't always like that, and you can get. I mean, one thing I really found out during the research for the Teachers Lounge was the immense pressure that teachers have to endure, that they have to put up with, because most of them are underpaid and they're overworked, and then they have to take all this criticism from parents and students. And I think there has been like some sort of erosion of the profession of teachers. Like back in the day when my parents used to say to me, well, when I went to school, they used to say, if your teacher says so, it must be right. And now it's quite the opposite. Now it's like, why is my kid getting a bad grade? isn't this your responsibility? Or let's say I was at the university, and not did I just evaluate the students, they also evaluated me, you know. So it's like, really, people think that teachers have immense power, but it's actually not what I see there, to be honest.
Yeah, well, no doubt the job of a teacher has gotten harder and harder, and people, I think, misunderstand how difficult it is, just even in terms of the demands cognitively of all of these students and the decisions that you have to make, and then you add on to it these pressures. And I would agree, we talk about it quite a bit here too, sort of the coddling of the American mind. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. It's actually now, they've turned it into a feature film or documentary. I'm not sure exactly. You can see it on Substack, but I haven't watched it. But
what's its name?
Coddling of the American Mind. So that builds on the book written by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist, and then Greg Lukianoff is, I think, the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, sort of really defending American First Amendment rights. But their thesis is there are three great untruths, and one of those three great untruths is what is it? What doesn't kill you makes you weaker, or something, like that, which is, of course, we want to have our students and thus adults be resilient and be able to experience and not need those trigger warnings, and be okay with that discomfort, and actually in some ways seek it out, because that's where the learning zone is in lots of cases, right? Which doesn't mean that we want to be mean and nasty and offensive and all of those things, but how do we build those tendencies and those habits that allow for you to hear differing opinions? And again, the work, some of the work that we do directly addresses that, the objective pluralism. But well, maybe it's a good segue, because you're talking about doing the research and thinking about teachers and the role of a teacher. So you have a main character, and she's a fairly new teacher, or maybe a new teacher, and this is her first job. So she's stepping into the role as a teacher, and of course she's an actress and not a teacher. So what was to prepare her for that? I'm curious, what was her preparation, and what did that look like, and what were some of the important things for you as a director and the writer to sort of highlight in that role?
Right. So Leonie was on another shoot right before our film, so she didn't get much time to do any research. But she said to me, I completely trust this screenplay, and I know how you work. And I knew that it's my job as a director to be a writer first and foremost, because once you get the writing right, the direction will follow, and you don't really have to do anything. So what we did was we spent a lot of time in schools. We spend a lot of time with educators, talk to different schools, talk to different educators, psychologists as well, students, parents, everybody you can talk to, basically. And then you get a bouquet of how every school is different, and every school has their own policies, right? And within these policies, there are teachers that think in their own way. So we knew that we wanted this teacher to be one of the teachers that we had, a teacher who wants to be friends with their students, but at the same time asserts a certain authority as well, who's like good and always helpful, but does have a conflict with the system in itself, right? So the system in itself had to be the opposite of her mindset. So we thought, let's go for a school that has this kind of zero tolerance approach, that is a little bit more authoritarian, and she needs to find her role in there. And one thing that one of the teachers said to us, she said, "Well, this job is so, like, if you do not set your boundaries right, then it can eat you up." And you need to be able to set your boundaries emotionally as well as, work-wise. So we thought it could actually be interesting for this new teacher to not exactly have set the right boundaries yet. And this is how we approached it.
Yeah, well, no doubt that's an important piece of running a classroom and managing a classroom. How has the film been received? So it's certainly done well overseas, and you've gotten some awards, received some awards, and now I don't know if it's playing in the United States yet or it's about to play.
It is.
It is playing in the United States?
Yeah, it's on almost 200 screens. Yeah,
Okay.
all across the country.
Okay. Have you received much feedback, I suppose, most importantly for this podcast and this audience, from educators? Has that been something that that you've been able to pay attention to?
Oh yeah, and that was actually the thing that was terrifying me. But honestly, up until this day, all the educators that saw it were congratulating us, because they said, finally, this is a film that shows what we at times have to go through. And this stuff is it's really happening. It is happening. You have these groups in the teachers' lounge. You have these students that do cheat. You have those students that are troublemakers. And one screening in Germany was really special to me, because it was with educators as well as students. And after the film, one of the students got up and she said, "Thank you for this film. I, on my part, realized how hard I am on my educators. We all, curse about them. We criticize them so quickly. But here I see what they actually go through." And that moment was like a bridge moment where the film was connecting parties, and that was a very moving moment. But other than that, I mean, the film's been shown in countries such as Sweden, Turkey, Hungary, Spain, France, UK, America, United States, and it's been received very well. I must really, I'm very lucky and happy about how the film resonates with educators.
And it has been nominated for Best International Feature Oscar, right? Is that any developments on that? Anything additional?
Well, yeah, voting has started yesterday, so let's see what's going to happen. I mean, it's the film is a fairly small film. We shot this film for a really tiny budget, and the way it has won so many awards and went all the way to the top 5 at the Oscars is something that I would never have imagined. But it just shows that the film has a strength, and it has the potential to move people, and the potential to ask the right questions about our times. I think this is what's resonating with audiences.
If you would kind of talk a little bit more about the main character, Leonie, she's the actress, and certainly one of the film's themes is about power and power dynamics, and how that plays out in a number of different ways. And I was sort of struck by her performance, and I don't know quite the right adjective to use. Steely is not quite the right adjective. I don't know if you probably have a better adjective, but her affect and the way that she portrayed that struggle as she's trying to navigate, she's got some power, but then she's also the subject of power as she's trying to bridge gaps and that kind of thing. So if you can maybe talk a little bit about that sort of power dynamic, but her performance as it sort of portrayed that.
Yeah, we talked about that with her, actually. There's this very first scene in the film where she enters a room. There are 2 teachers on the one side of the table, and there are 2 students on the other side. And she sits right in the middle of the table. So she's in the middle of 2 parties. And I said to Leonie, and that scene is about an interrogation. These teachers asked those kids to give away names of possible, fellow students that could have, could be maybe the culprit. And I said to Leonie, there is a reason why you're in the middle of this table. So you have to balance that relationship to your colleagues as well as to your students. And this is something. This is like this is the hardest thing to navigate. And she got it. She said, "Okay, if this is what you want me to be, this is the spot that you want me to be at. I'm gonna do it just like that." And therefore, you see her all the time in this very conflicted thing where she's basically trying to be a fair teacher, and she's also trying to be, a colleague, but she has a harder time being a good colleague because her colleagues are, they proceed in a way, they execute things in a way that she doesn't approve of. And so she's in this, and she's conflicted about that, how to deal with it and how to, keep her cool. And at the same time, also tell those colleagues that she's not okay with it, how they proceed. And it's actually something that Johannes and I, my co-writer and I, that we experienced in our time in school. Like there was this moment where we were in class and then 3 teachers came into the class and they asked us to put the wallets on the table. And we said, we didn't question that behavior. We just did what they told us to. And when we wrote that scene and gave it to educators, because you need to get the research, right? They said, this is actually something that you couldn't do nowadays, but you would only you could only be able to do it if you were to say, this is voluntary. So if you don't have anything to hide, you don't have anything to fear. And then we thought, wait, this sentence we kind of know from somewhere. Politicians use this sentence when it comes to our privacy issues. So that was the moment where we thought, okay, this is actually very interesting because, children aren't aware of their rights, and it takes some courage to say no to a teacher who's, in that hierarchy much, much, much higher than you. And the film is dealing with this sort of power dynamics a lot, I think. It's a lot about, how you assert your opinion or your will on another person. And to us, it was very important to have the kids not just as victims. So at some point, the class strikes back, right? And it's actually the wrong person that they anyway.
Well, that I was going to talk about that and mention that, I guess, because as you mentioned, so she's trying to sort of protect, but also curry favor and figure out that relationship with her students, but also with her colleagues. And it goes well and wrong at different parts. And as you mentioned, so students individually often really struggle to have that empowerment, that courage to speak up. But in the film, they collectively come together and, as you sort of said, strike back. And one of the things that we see from some educators here in the States, at least, is this idea of sort of flattening all of the power dynamics, that we want to get rid of those power dynamics, and we want to really make sure that students aren't being sort of held, under the thumb, if you will, or some version of that, which to me is a worthy ideal, but actually doesn't work very well in practice because, there is, in my estimation, a very real important piece of having adults who are leading and, have some authority. But of course, there's that tension of, are they doing so responsibility? And I think you get into that in the film pretty well.
Definitely. I also like the idea, but I also do think that children need to be taught to respect authority. they can question authority, but they need to be able to respect it. And this was something that a lot of teachers told us, that that especially parents don't want to be authoritarian anymore.
Right.
And they asked the teachers to do that part. But then teachers say to us, if they don't learn this at home, they won't respect you in school either.
Mm-hmm.
So there is like, I don't know. I mean, I'm really fond of the idea of being friends with everybody, but I think especially children and students, they are still provoking, and they are looking for ways in life to get ahead. And you can offer them, you can be the nicest person in the world. That doesn't necessarily mean that they will be so nice to you, because it can be a joke that everybody's going to laugh about, or it can be, some attention they get when they are mean. So the nicer you are, you can be nice, but you have to also maintain some sort of authority, I think. Mm-hmm. And that's crucial. And if you don't find that balance, there are students who will take advantage of it.
Yeah, well, we would call that sort of sweet spot authoritative, not authoritarian. Authoritarian being much more aggressive and assertive and not allowing students to be empowered and those kinds of things. Whereas authoritative is certainly giving guidance using the wisdom and things that responsible adults should have, but students and kids.
This is me lacking vocabulary.
Yeah. Well, you probably could say it in German, but the idea that students don't need boundaries is a fallacious one. In fact, they do need boundaries. They do need guidance, and when they don't, they develop some insecurity and they act out trying to figure out where those boundaries are and all of those kinds of things. So, one of the things that I'm curious about here is what you hope. First of all, in the education community, especially, who you hope to reach, and because my guess is your promotional tours don't often bring you to education podcasts, and I'm certain this film is not meant just for educators. It is in German, right, and is subtitled, but certainly an interesting film and worth watching. So, what are you hoping that folks who might be listening who are English speakers, and perhaps in the United States, again, we have folks who listen outside the United States, and perhaps very likely some German speakers, but I'm curious, like, what are your hopes in that sort of realm?
Right. So first of all, I need to say that I did a lot of educational podcasts with this film.
Oh, okay. And
I was on a couple of panels with politicians, and I think that is something that I would want this film to, that conversation needs to be sparked. I think the way how the way we value the work of educators. I am really glad about this Oscar nomination, because it creates more visibility for this film, and I hope it sheds a light on the work of educators that is so often underestimated. And when they ask me about those politicians ask me about, well, what would you improve in education? I'm always inclined to say, well, I'm just a filmmaker, and there are experts about this. But I mean, just very simple things. When I did my research and I went to these schools. In Germany, school starts at 8 a.m., right? And I look around and everybody is like half asleep. And I question this really. I was like, why? I mean, it's scientifically proven that your learning is much better when if school were to start at 10 or 11, and then you talk about these things and you find out, well, it starts so early so that parents can drop off their kids at school and go to work. So it's basically, education is in the hierarchy of things lower. It's about, first there is economy needs to keep rolling. And then, there's education. And then, as I'm saying, these are just things that I observe as just, quote unquote, just a filmmaker, right? But I think there is. I would love this film to really think about how in Germany, for instance, we have a lack of 25,000 teachers because nobody wants to pick up this profession anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to do this job anymore, and that is because it's just really, as I'm saying, underpaid, overworked, and why would you do it? So much stress, right?
Yeah.
And I think politicians need to take care of that.
Yeah. Well, where can people see it and view it, especially if they're in the United States? You said it's open in, I think, quite a few theaters. We'll put a link in the show notes to the trailer and any other links that you think are worth sharing as well, of course. But where should folks find it, and what should they do to sort of pursue if they're interested?
Well, I think you can find it in your local art house movie theaters. It's showing across, like, it's a bunch of cities that's in the US where the film is showing right now. And I think in a couple of months it should be on stream as well. So watch out, look out for it. And if you can see it at the theater, it's of course much nicer. And the movie-going experience is always beautiful because, like, I sometimes do sneak into my own screenings, and then I listen to people when they get out, and it's just so nice to hear these people talk about the film afterwards. And it's always interesting because the film is really a film that is, an offer for a discussion. It's not a film that will provide you with answers, but it's just posing some questions, and there is a discussion circling around the film, and I hope that folks can see and watch it and spread the word.
And do you know at this point where it might be streamed, or is it too early to know that?
I do not know about that, but it should be one of those, it should be Amazon or Apple, or I don't know. The local distributor has those deals, and I'm not
sure. Right. Okay, well, is there anything that we didn't talk about that we should? And if not, then are there any links or places you want them to go other than to the movie theater to watch it?
No, honestly, we talked about a lot, and I'm sure when we hang up, I'll think of things, but no, I don't know. I just don't know.
Okay,
Sorry.
Any links that they should visit? Anything that you'd like to share, social media or anything like that?
They should see the trailer, definitely.
Right. Okay. Like I said, we'll put the trailer in the show notes. It's a Sony Pictures. It's in the Sony Pictures, I guess.
Sony Pictures Classics, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Ilker, it's been a pleasure talking, and I certainly thought the movie was interesting and worth watching. And so folks who are interested in some of those dynamics that we talked about, the truth and justice and power dynamics and that kind of thing, certainly gets into it and gets some stretches your thinking, as we might say here at Thought Stretchers. So I appreciate the time.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
What we need to do is spend enough time together that we can start to translate our ideas into each other's language and include one another in this community of inquiry. And that is the work of love.